Hey folks, Sally Riggs here, psychologist, fellow long hauler, and your long COVID coach. And today I want to talk about the very popular topic of brain retraining. So many people talk about brain retraining in long COVID recovery, and you have probably come across many online programs that call themselves brain retraining. But do they actually work? Most brain retraining programs have two components. One is some type of work on the limbic system, and the other is this thing that we call neuroplasticity. And I'm going to talk about both of those a little bit in some more detail for you, starting with neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity definitely is a legitimate scientific concept. And basically what it means, neuro, which is our brain, has the ability to form new pathways throughout our lifetime. So although we may have damage to parts of our brain, or we may have certain pathways that don't work anymore, the brain is infinitely capable of renewing itself and will form new pathways. Much like you would see in somebody who loses one of their senses, like hearing, or maybe loses a limb, that they learn to do some of the things that they used to do with other parts of their body or with other senses. And all of that is because the brain is forming new pathways. It's also the concept that we tap into this time of year. I know lots of people who don't have long COVID are talking about New Year's resolutions, building new habits. Neuroplasticity is a huge part of that. And we know that it takes 21 days to build a new pathway and reinforce it. And so a lot of people who are building out New Year's resolutions and trying to form new habits are kind of following programs where they do the same thing every day consistently for 21 days, and then supposedly it consolidates in that way. Obviously, this is a really important concept in long COVID, A, because we do have brain damage, and B, because when we are very sick and dealing with chronic fatigue and post-exertion malaise and wind up being very limited in our function and capacity, as we start to recover and build back our lives, we will need to build new neural pathways in order to do things again that once were habits and we haven't done for maybe months or years. So now that we know what neuroplasticity is, let's talk a little bit about the limbic system. So the limbic system is part of our brain. It is responsible for emotion and kind of behaviors related to emotion. It's a kind of primitive part of our brain. If we're thinking in evolutionary terms, it's a more primitive part of the brain that is very common in many animals that don't yet have the higher level of thinking that we now have with this bit in the front of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. So the limbic system is sort of in the back here, inside. If we think about its connection to the autonomic nervous system, you've got the vagus nerve, you've got the brain stem, and then it connects into the limbic system, and then the other parts of the brain around the front. The limbic system has the amygdala in it, which you may have heard of. It also has the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus. You may have heard of those words. You can look up in great detail what they are. But really, it's sort of an automatic part of the brain that is involved with emotions. Oftentimes we talk about fear and anxiety and the responses that we might have automatically as a result of those feelings. It's heavily implicated in psychological disorders, for example, PTSD, anxiety disorders, depression. So it's kind of a lot talked about. Now, the reason why it's kind of relevant in the case of long COVID kind of gets into a theory that I personally don't agree with, but is also talked about a lot in the mind-body community, that fear is at the center of our symptoms. And there are people who would argue our symptoms are not physiological or biological at all, and that they all come about as a result of fear. Now, I don't agree with that personally, and you've definitely heard me talk a lot about the organic biological basis of our illness, but certainly we all have a limbic system, and if we have an autonomic nervous system that isn't working, then that is going to affect how the limbic system is operating, and those signals that go up and down from the gut to the brain go through the limbic system, and if they are interrupted, then it makes sense that everything in that chain is also going to be a little bit dysfunctional. Certainly you have heard me before talk about my thoughts on the role of fear in long COVID, and if you haven't seen that video, I will link it up here so that you can get more information about that. But essentially, these brain retraining programs that have limbic system and neuroplasticity work in them are somewhat hinting at these explanations for long COVID. And you may not fully endorse that yourself, but you may notice that you have a lot of anxiety and are curious for tools that can help you with that anxiety, and so you might be drawn to those programs. In my experience, brain retraining programs are not terribly successful, and there's a couple of reasons why. The first is to do with the limbic system. And most of the exercises that these programs are prescribing for so-called limbic system training are what we call top-down, i.e. they originate in the brain here and they're kind of going down through the system this way. The trouble is that the limbic system, being somewhat automatic, a bit like the autonomic nervous system, isn't really amenable to that kind of input. So the one that comes to my mind is, because so many people have told me that I need to do this, and now I know better, I just tell them actually that's nonsense, is the one where you put your hand on your heart and you say to yourself, I am safe, I am safe, I am safe. And if you have a limbic system that is going ping, 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 ping for danger and fear, putting your hand on your heart and saying I am safe is not going to do anything. You may be relating to this in that you have taken one of these programs and you have tried some of these strategies and you're feeling frustrated. Why is this not working? Is there something wrong with me? And the answer is no, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that our brains and our bodies are not designed to change in this way. And I think this is a really important message, because I think there is a lot of push about these brain retraining programs, and there is a lot of advertising materials that suggest that they are incredibly effective and that is going to be our cure. And if you're in one of those programs and it's not working for you, it is very easy then to feel badly, and that's going to snowball your symptoms and make you feel worse, maybe even have a crash. Personally, my experience from doing similar training, there was a lot of self-criticism brought up, and as we know, that is not helpful to us. If we think about the nervous system is bottom up, which means that it starts internally. It is not amenable to that cognitive override. The things that cue us for safety are lots of minuscule internal things that we're not aware of. The things that cue us for not safety are lots of internal minuscule things that we're not aware of. If we're working on our nervous system, working on those internal cues for safety, and some of the external ones, we talk about orienting, where you let your eyes take in all the things, and that is then going through into your body and giving it cues for safety. If we do that, because all those signals have to go through the limbic system to get to the rest of the brain, that is telling your limbic system that you're safe. And so doing nervous system work, and some of these programs have a teeny tiny bit of nervous system work in them. As we calm the nervous system, as we befriend the nervous system, then our limbic system naturally calms down and is less likely to misfire in situations that there isn't a threat or some type of emotional trigger. The other component, coming back to the neuroplasticity piece, and this is so important because there's a real potential here for us to accidentally do more damage, and none of us wants that. Neuroplasticity is legitimate. It's very, very powerful, but it's nervous system state dependent. So if you are in fight or flight and you do your brain retraining exercises for neuroplasticity, you are reinforcing fight or flight and making it more likely to show up in your body. If you do brain retraining neuroplasticity exercises when you are in shutdown, you are reinforcing the shutdown and making it more likely to show up in your body. And most of us with long COVID already spend far too much time in those states. We do not need to reinforce them any further. When we do get back into rest and digest, we do the nervous system work. Maybe you've done the safe and sound protocol. You're starting to have moments where rest and digest shows up more. You get the compassion, the gratitude, the acceptance. Then that's where your neuroplasticity work is incredibly powerful and important, because we want to reinforce rest and digest. Most of us have not seen it enough in recent years, possibly even in our lifetime. And so when it is there, that is exactly when we want to establish new neural pathways and reinforce them. And oftentimes you will hear people in the nervous system world talking about increasing capacity or resilience. And that's what these concepts are about, that when you get into rest and digest, maybe you're regularly having 15, 20, 30 minutes a day. That's when you want to jump in and do some brain retraining, because you're going to extend that capacity, extend the window with which you can stay in rest and digest. And that's incredibly important. And as we think more and more about building our new dream life in our recovery, that's when, again, this brain retraining and that neuroplasticity can be very important. Because when you have this new capacity, we don't really know what to do with it anymore. You know, we've had months, years of just being limited in our capacity to do things, to function, to experience joy, to connect with friends. So if you have a lovely social interaction with a friend, you want to reinforce that and have the opportunity for more, do some brain retraining. And personally, I can really relate to this example as I have recovered and had more and more strength and energy and more time in rest and digest. I have done what many of us do and use that all up on work. And so sometimes I look at my life and yes, I have been traveling a great deal and that's a big part of my dream life. But when I'm at home in New York, actually my day to day is much like it was when I was very, very sick. And that's because I need to stop and take the time to build new habits and reinforce those habits, build new pathways and reinforce those pathways. And that's where brain retraining and neuroplasticity really come in and are important. If you like this video, I release new videos every Wednesday, so please hit that subscribe button so you get a notification. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today, and especially if you're watching all the way through to the end here. I hope you have a tolerable week, and I look forward to seeing you again on one of these videos.